There are two kinds of quiet daughters in every house: the ones whose silence means obedience, and the ones whose silence means memory. Most parents never learn the difference, not until one morning when a folder slides across the kitchen table and the daughter finally looks up. And in that single moment, the mother realizes she raised the wrong kind of quiet girl. My name is Madison Vance. I turned 18 on April 15th, 2026. And less than 9 hours later, my mother tried to steal my inheritance while smiling over pancakes. Before we look inside that folder and expose the dark secret my family hid for years, drop a comment letting me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is reading with us in our quiet community. The kitchen at Oak Ridge Estates always smelled like filtered light and expensive paint, a spotless white monument to a family status my stepfather, Travis Sterling, spent every waking hour trying to maintain. On the morning of April 15th, 2026, the air was heavy with the scent of vanilla pancakes and calculated warmth. My mother, Amanda, sat across from me in her tailored silk robe, her birthday smile perfectly symmetrical, almost painted on. Travis sat to her right, his large frame hunched over an iPad, his knuckles white against the edge of the mahogany table. "Happy 18th, Madison," my mother whispered, sliding a thick manila folder across the marble countertop until it rested precisely between my plate and my coffee cup. The embossed gold letters on the front read, "Generational Wealth Unification Clause. We need to discuss your money, sweetie. It's a big responsibility, and Travis has set up a wonderful corporate structure to protect it for all of us." I looked at the folder, letting the clinical clarity settle over me. For years, she had mistaken my quietness for blindness. She genuinely believed that because I didn't argue, I didn't remember. She thought I was the first kind of quiet girl. I didn't open the folder. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was an audit. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and laid it face up on the marble. The screen was already open to a certified transaction receipt from Midland Trust Services. "You're 9 hours too late, Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotional static she usually weaponized against me. At exactly 12:01 a.m., the inheritance from Grandpa Charles ceased to exist in an open account. Every single dollar of that $1,360,000 was moved into the Elizabeth Trust. It is completely irrevocable, privately managed, and legally sealed. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only precision. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. The painted smile on my mother's face didn't fade. It fractured. Travis stopped scrolling. They weren't shocked by what they'd done, they were shocked that I'd stopped playing along. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family, but my compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years. Now I realized love had been a subscription model, with me expected to foot the bill indefinitely. This wasn't revenge, it was simple accounting. The silence that followed was instant, thick, and suffocating. Travis leaned forward, his heavy voice dropping an octave into the tone he used when a commercial subcontractor defied him on a job site. His jaw tightened, and he demanded to know what the hell I had just said. He wasn't used to numbers he couldn't manipulate or people he couldn't bully into compliance. "I said the money is gone, Travis," I repeated, locking my eyes onto his with lethal precision. "The signature page you spent 4 months preparing with Jeffrey Crane is useless paper. I haven't just protected the money. I've removed your access to my future entirely." My mother's hands began to shake as she reached for her coffee. She started whispering about how they did everything for me, how they kept this roof over my head. It was the same old script, but the words had lost their transactional value. I stood up, leaving the untouched pancakes on the plate. Inside, my laptop upstairs glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I told her she kept a roof over her head using my father's memory, and that today I was taking the keys back. To understand why I didn't hesitate on the midnight of my birthday, you have to understand how our house actually worked. My biological father, Gregory Vance, died when I was 10 years old. He left behind a silver watch with a cracked frame and an unshakable belief that I was capable of anything. After the state trooper left our porch that foggy November morning, my mother didn't grieve. She restructured. 2 years later, Travis Sterling moved his loud truck and his louder opinions into our lives, bringing his daughter Brianna with him. Brianna was 12, loud, and expensive. I was the middle child who learned that visibility in our house was dangerous. If I expressed a boundary, I was called ungrateful. If I asked for basic transparency, my mother would touch her chest and sigh, asking how I could treat her this way after everything she sacrificed to keep us in Oak Ridge Estate. What my family completely misunderstood about my compliance was the difference between submission and survival. For 4 years, I watched my mother allocate the family budget to Brianna's elite boarding school fees while I worked 20 hours a week at a local library just to cover my own secondhand car insurance, gas, and clothes. I stayed silent when Travis used my father's old land equity as collateral for his failing commercial developments. In our house, compliance was an invisible chain. If you pull against it too early, the narcissist simply shortens the leash. Anger during those long years wasn't loud. It was a quiet, steady accumulation of fact. I didn't feel despair. I only felt a growing sense of clarity. I had been the silent investor in their version of family. They had treated my emotional compliance as an open line of credit to finance their own lifestyle, never expecting the account to close. During a family dinner the previous winter, the hallway smelled like burnt toast and tension. Travis had slammed his glass down, celebrating a new commercial construction contract, shouting about how the Sterling name was building an empire. My mother had beamed, whispering to Brianna that her college tuition at a private New York design school was fully secured. I had sat at the edge of that table, pushing my food around, knowing the truth. I had seen the mail. I knew Travis's company was over-leveraged by nearly 7 figures. I knew they weren't paying for Brianna's future with his success. They were counting down the days until my 18th birthday to use Grandpa Charles's $1,360,000 legacy to liquidate their corporate debt. I now saw their affection for what it truly was, a transactional trap designed to keep me compliant until the payout. Madison is so self-sufficient. My mother would tell the neighbors at the country club, her voice shifting to a false pride that masked her total abandonment of my emotional life. What she really meant was that I was useful because I didn't require her resources. I was an invisible insurance policy for their vanity, an asset they completely undervalued until it was out of reach. But the problem with raising an invisible daughter is that she learns how to become a ghost, moving through the shadows, collecting data, and waiting for the exact moment to materialize with an enforcement order. Everything stayed silent for days after that breakfast, but in my head, their text messages kept looping like a siren. My mother sent a 3-page paragraph at 2:14 a.m., claiming I had created a massive financial mess for the family, that my stepfather's blood pressure was dangerous, and demanding I call home immediately before I ruined my sister's enrollment. Then came Travis's clinical threat, warning me that his temporary custodian status on the account until the bank processed my adulthood paperwork gave him the power to tie the funds up in court for years, and telling me to stop playing games. Finally came the public play, my mother posting a sunset photo on Facebook with a caption about how some children spend their lives collecting pieces of a legacy they did nothing to build, completely forgetting the hands that fed them. They weren't shocked by their own betrayal, they were just panicked by the sudden default on their expected revenue. It didn't work. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. The toxicity was too familiar to cause an emotional overdraft. I sat on the floor of my small room, looking at the old oak box Grandpa Charles had handed me a year before he passed. The wood still smelled like old paper and dried leaves, a scent that carried zero manipulation. Inside sat a sealed white envelope with my name written in his heavy, deliberate cursive. This wasn't a sentimental family heirloom. It was an emergency audit sent from the grave. The letter inside was only 10 lines long, but it contained the entire blueprint for my freedom. Peanut, he had written, if you are reading this, your mother has finally run out of her own money and has started looking at yours. I spent 30 years watching Amanda rewrite reality to suit her vanity, and my greatest regret is that I stayed quiet for too long, hoping she would develop a conscience for your sake. A mother who trades her child's security for her husband's vanity is not a parent, she is a financial manager. My diagnosis gives me 4 months left, which means I cannot be there to stand between you and her lawyer, Jeffrey Crane. But Thomas Albright knows my mind. Call him. Your 18th birthday is the legal horizon. Do not let them see your face change until the clock strikes midnight. Grandpa Charles hadn't just left me money, he had left me an escape velocity. He understood that the only way to beat a manipulative system is to completely remove yourself from its jurisdiction. I picked up my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the page, refusing to let their emotional baseline alter my alignment. When Thomas Albright answered, his voice wasn't filled with family drama, it was filled with the steady, unyielding structure of the law. He told me he had been tracking my mother's filings with Jeffrey Crane's firm for 3 months and that they had the protective corporate documents ready for my signature. He told me not to change my routine at home, to keep my face unreadable, and to let them think the target was still standing exactly where they left it. I looked out the window at the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates. The trees looked thin and clinical in the late New England spring. My family was downstairs, probably sitting around their empty folder, realizing for the first time that the quiet girl in the bedroom hadn't been obeying them. I wasn't an asset they could liquidate anymore. I was simply counting down their operational lifespan. Thomas Albright's office sat above a historic brick storefront in downtown Boston, a quiet sanctuary filled with floor-to-ceiling case law volumes and a single green banker's lamp that cast a sharp light across a stack of financial disclosures. There were no emotional landmines here, no performance of family unity, just the cold, beautiful clarity of documentation. Your stepfather, Travis Sterling, has been using an LLC called Sterling Custom Holdings to process his commercial real estate debt, Thomas explained, sliding a corporate registry chart across the desk. The document your mother tried to make you sign would have absorbed your $1,360,000 trust into that asset pool as a non-refundable capital injection. It was a complete liquidation of your inheritance disguised as a family security account. I watched the lines on the chart connect his debts directly to my name. My stomach turned cold, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I didn't feel panic. I felt the arrival of a structural solution. I looked at the attorney and asked what would have happened if I had signed that paper on my birthday. Within 30 days, Travis would have used the corporate authority to clear his equipment leases, and you would have been left holding a minority share in a bankrupt shell company. Thomas said, without softening the truth, "Your mother knew this, Madison." Jeffrey Crane's firm received a $40,000 retainer from Travis's business account the day after the unification agreement was drafted. It was a simple business transaction. The honesty didn't break me, it unified me. Every memory of my mother's passive-aggressive comments, every dinner where I was treated like an expensive obligation, finally settled into a clear legal framework. I looked at the documents, feeling a profound sense of vindication. They didn't see a daughter, they saw an undocumented line of credit to fix their negative cash flow. They had overdrawn my patience for a decade. But the balance was now 0. "Let's finalize the Elizabeth Trust," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet office with lethal precision. "I want every asset grandfather left me insulated by a corporate trustee. No family borrowing provisions, no hardship exceptions for Amanda or Travis. If they want to access my life, they can do it through a formal court petition." We worked for 3 hours under that green lamp, building a legal cage around my future that no emotional blackmail could ever pierce. Thomas drafted a formal notice of trust establishment, an airtight declaration of independence that would be served to Amanda's attorney the following morning. As I signed the final initialization pages, I felt the last lingering weight of filial guilt completely evaporate. Inside, my choices were no longer a family debate, they were a legal injunction. Society tells us that defying your parents is an act of betrayal, but the law understands that defending your assets from predators is an act of necessity, even if those predators share your last name. This was final accountability. I left the office and stepped into the cold Boston air, knowing that when the manila folder finally hit our kitchen table, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be an execution of judgment. The transition didn't come through a calendar date, but through a single phone call from a voice I hadn't heard since my father's funeral. My aunt Laura, my father's younger sister, called me on a rainy afternoon while I was packing my books into cardboard boxes. Her voice had the same sharp grit my father used to have when he was talking about an honest day's work. Madison, she said, without any introductory small talk. Albright told me you locked down Charles's money. Good. But you're only looking at half the paperwork. You need to look at what happened in 2018. I sat down on the edge of my bed, my fingers sinking into the mattress. I didn't panic. Panic is an operational liability. I simply asked what she meant. When your father Gregory died in that collision on Route 30, he didn't just leave behind that silver Ford Ranger and a plot of land, Laura said, her breath heavy over the line. He had a $900,000 commercial life insurance policy specifically designated for your educational and residential care. It was supposed to be a protected fund managed by an independent guardian. My chest tightened, but my brain ran the calculation immediately. My mother had told me the insurance only covered the funeral and the outstanding vehicle debt. She had told me we were broke, using that manufactured scarcity to justify her systemic emotional overdrafts. She lied, Peanut, Laura hissed. She and that slick lawyer, Jeffrey Crane, filed a fraudulent court waiver 2 months after the accident. They forged the signature of the independent guardian appointed by the probate court, shifting the execution rights directly into an account Amanda controlled before Travis Sterling even entered the picture. They used your father's death to fund the down payment on Oak Ridge Estates. I stood up, walking over to my desk, where my father's cracked silver watch sat under the lamp. I don't remember how long I lasted, staring at that cracked watch frame. All I know is that the memory of his old silver truck suddenly felt completely recontextualized. The smell of motor oil and sawdust inside his old garage wasn't just a nostalgic echo anymore. It was the background of an unpaid debt. He had built a world where I would never have to beg anyone for safety, and they had hijacked it before the ink on his death certificate was even dry. I called Thomas Albright instantly. By 5 p.m., his team had pulled the archives from the 2018 probate registry. The signature on the waiver form was a clumsy, violent imitation of the court-appointed guardian's hand. It wasn't just corporate greed anymore. This wasn't family friction. It was systematic forgery. It was asset theft targeting a 10-year-old orphaned child. "This is the kill shot, Madison," Thomas said when he pulled up the scanned high-resolution files on our secure portal. Jeffrey Crane didn't just draft an unethical unification document for your 18th birthday. He actively participated in a fiduciary fraud 8 years ago to protect your mother's real estate ambitions. If we bring this data to the state disciplinary board, Crane doesn't just lose his license, he faces a grand jury indictment. I looked at the signature mismatch on my screen. The 2 lines of ink didn't even cross at the same angle. For 8 years, I had walked through the pristine hallways of Oak Ridge Estates feeling like a charity case, eating dinners paid for with my father's blood money while being told I was an expensive burden. This wasn't an emotional crisis. It was a closed audit. They hadn't just built a legal cage around my future. They had built their entire luxury lifestyle on top of my father's grave. Winter had settled into the Boston streets by the time the fallout finally reached my doorstep. I was staying in a small rented room near campus when the heavy brass knockers sounded at 7:30 p.m. When I opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged, I didn't see the elegant, unshakable matriarch of Oak Ridge Estates. I saw Amanda Vance standing in the cold rain, her designer coat soaked, her mascara smeared into dark hollows under her eyes. She smelled like wet wool and unadulterated panic, holding a fresh envelope in her trembling hands. She pleaded with me, telling me that Travis's credit lines had been frozen by the bank, that Jeffrey Crane was refusing to answer their calls, and that the bank's final non-negotiable foreclosure auction on the house, a hard deadline they had hidden from me until now, was scheduled for exactly 10 a.m. the next morning. She begged me to do something, if only for my sister's sake. I looked at her through the narrow gap in the door. For 18 years, her approval had been the currency I starved for. Now, looking at her, I felt nothing but a profound clinical detachment. What my mother never understood during her years of high-status performance at the country club was the illusion of power in an empty wallet. Her power was a facade rented with stolen capital. The sterling name, the pristine colonial exterior of Oak Ridge Estates, The loud truck. Travis drove. It wasn't a legacy built on character or hard work. It was a fragile scaffolding held up by the $900,000 they had pilfered from my father and the inheritance they had failed to steal from me. When a predator's wallet goes empty, their entire moral authority collapses with it. They stop looking like dangerous rulers and start looking like desperate beggars, realizing too late that when you treat your children like financial assets, you forfeit the right to ask them for family loyalty. I told her calmly that I had already handled the paperwork, reaching onto the small table near the door to pull out a certified copy of the disciplinary board filing. Thomas Albright had finalized that afternoon. I handed her the forensic audit regarding my father's 2018 life insurance policy. The state attorney's office had already verified the forged signature. The bank didn't freeze Travis's accounts because of a missing release form. They froze them because of a criminal fraud investigation. My mother stared at the document, her mouth opening and closing in absolute silence as the final crack in her mask exposed the terrifying vacuum underneath. She choked out that I had destroyed them. I whispered that I simply read the contract she had placed in front of me when I was 10 years old. I said goodbye, slid the door closed, and the heavy brass lock turned with a clean, definitive click. The aftermath in Oak Ridge Estates was swift and documented. Unable to pay the court-ordered restitution for the 2018 insurance fraud, Travis Sterling's development company filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. His equipment was sold off at a public county auction, and his silver truck was repossessed from the driveway of a home they no longer owned. My mother moved into a modest, rented 2-bedroom apartment on the rough outskirts of the city. Her country club membership quietly canceled due to non-payment of dues. She was currently out on bail, awaiting her own trial as a co-conspirator in the grand larceny case. Meanwhile, Jeffrey Crane was permanently disbarred and faced immediate criminal indictment for grand larceny and fiduciary fraud after the disciplinary board reviewed the forensic evidence. Brianna Sterling lost her deposit at that private New York design school and enrolled at UMass Boston instead, commuting from her mom's apartment and using standard federal loans. She sent me a short text message apologizing, stating she didn't know about the 2018 money. I wrote back, offering to grab coffee next May. She hadn't created the system. She was just another asset they had over-leveraged for their vanity. Now, I sit in the quiet corners of my university library, watching the late winter snow touch the window pane. My desk is covered in engineering textbooks, a warm mug of tea, and the silver watch my father left behind. For the first time in my 18 years of life, the silence around me doesn't mean survival. It means safety. It means peace. I've come to realize that the deep hurt of family betrayal rarely comes from the financial loss. It comes from the realization that you were never viewed as a person to be loved, but as an operations fund to be managed. Society pounds us with the dogmatic rule that blood requires unconditional compliance, that you must allow people to dismantle your emotional and financial security simply because they gave you birth. That rule is an absolute lie designed to protect predators who lack the character to build their own lives. True dependency shouldn't mean carrying their guilt to keep the peace. It means having the cold, quiet courage to hand their choices back to them wrapped in a legal boundary they cannot cross. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your silence is not weakness, it is a recording device. Collect your data, protect your assets, and wait for your legal horizon. Because forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free and become so completely untouchable that their opinions no longer have the power to alter your gravity. If this story of strategic autonomy moved you, click like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs the courage to enforce their own boundaries. Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done if that manila folder was slid across your table? Let's continue the conversation in our community.